Hey guys, welcome back to another Realm of the Mad God video, and today I want to talk about 5 UT weapons that need buffs. More specifically, I'm talking about white bag weapons, so not necessarily cyan bag stuff such as Sea Silk or Expo Ring, just purely white bag UTs. Realm as a whole has been a pretty well balanced game, as in it's been around for almost 10 years, and for the most part, the power ceiling hasn't been overextended like you would see in other MMO games that have that kind of lifespan. That being said, there's quite a few white bag weapons that low-key suck, and they could use a little more love. I'm not necessarily saying they're unusable, well, some of them at least. In fact, almost all of them are usable, just they don't really stand out in any particular way, to the point where why would you ever use them over something else? I'm not going to be using weapons that are intentionally meant to be gimmicky or bad. That includes vanity weapons like the St. Patrick's Day weapons or Machine, stuff like, EP Staff or the Wand of the Bulwark, things like that. No reskins either, but if Deca does buff these items, I hope they do the same for their reskin counterpart. I'm going to be starting with weapons, and then the next video will be abilities, and then armors, and then finally rings. Once more, these are untiered weapons, so I'm not talking about STs. I know there are a few items in ST sets that are in need of changes, but I think they can be their own video. But if you enjoyed this video, a rating would be much appreciated, and without further ado, let's get into the list. I don't really need to explain why it's prevailing wisdom that the Ancient Stone Sword, or ASS I'm going to call it, is way past its prime. At release, it was a pretty solid item, especially on warriors because it traded in attack speed for higher damage per shot and a little bit more range. For all intents and purposes, it's a side grade kind of from the Crystal Sword, and practically the sword version of Doombow, just not nearly as good. You basically opted to swap this out for your standard Acclaim or Demon Blade if you wanted to get a couple shots in that really packed a punch, especially when facing enemies that don't exactly enjoy your company at a close range. Here's the issue. It's consistently weaker than an Acclaim or Pirate King's Cutlass because the higher base damage doesn't completely offset the lower rate of fire. Yes, I am aware, the extra 0.5 range could be beneficial, but because of the meta we're in right now that favors steamrolling and essentially face tanking everything by using M-Seal or a bunch of Priest and Pallies, gaining that minuscule amount of range is almost completely irrelevant. There's also the problem that Sword of the Colossus is infinitely better than ASS. Of course, it came out much later in the timeline of the game, but heck, even the Swashbuckler Sickle beats it out and has even more range, just with the wavy shot pattern. Mind you, Kalo should be better given that it drops from a significantly higher dungeon, but across the board, there's not a single niche where you would want to use ASS over any other sword. I would say that the best way to buff this sword is not actually its damage or rate of fire, those I think should keep consistent, but perhaps give it even more range so that it fully embraces its purpose of getting a few couple shots in quickly from a reasonably safe distance. If we were to buff it to 4.5 range, it could be considered a direct upgrade to the Sea Sword since ASS is arguably harder and less frequent to obtain than the former. It's a good early to mid-level white bag and I want to keep it as such. But even at early to mid-level, there's no reason to use ASS since its pros don't really compensate for the cons. The Ray Katana. Probably the worst white bag drop of all the event gods, let's be real here. Sure, it gives ninjas and samurai some much needed range so they can take on areas and enemies where close quarters is just too suicidal to do so, like Oryx 2, or I guess even clearing the Godlands. But we run into the same kind of issue that we did with ASS. Sacrifices way too much damage for its benefits to even be given consideration. Having a flat 111 damage means it's a very consistent DPS weapon, but 111 is too low a number. It's basically weaker than a tier 8 Demon Edge, and an extra 1.4 range give or take, that isn't gonna cut it because the goal of this weapon is to be able to safely farm at a distance. But 9 out of 10 times the regular 4.5 range tier katanas have is safe enough for ninjas and samurais to get in, not even factoring the fact that ninjas can shoot their star from a long distance and samurais have the walkie. Get their damage in and out, even for the likes of bosses such as Oryx 2, it's not a difficult task for them to accomplish. Quite a number of other katanas fulfill Ray Katana's usage a lot more effectively, such as the Doku no Ken or the new Kiritsukeru, and I guess to a lesser extent the Quartz Cutter. All 3 of these are marginally easier to obtain too. Ray Katana just straight up needs more damage, unlike the ASS that could use a bit more range. I don't think Ray Katana needs range, I think it got enough of that, almost about, give or take the range of a bow. It just needs a damage boost. Not wise enough to buff it too high, otherwise we run into the Doku problem where it's like a straight upgrade. I believe Doku's average DPS pre-nerf was about 175 per hit if we factor in the higher rate of fire, which beats out Masamune's 157.5. And since Ray Katana has about 1 more tile range than a Doku, I guess a decent buff could be to boost it up to 130 damage per shot. Alternatively, we can also just compensate by adding stat boosts to Ray Katana, such as like +2 attack and dex. Either one works, of course. We want to keep Ray Katana's damage lower since it gives a lot more range, but at the moment it's too low to warrant any usage even where it could be useful. Queen Stinger. It's a pretty interesting specimen. It's considered one of the rarest white bag drops in the game in terms of dungeons, and at a glance it looks awesome. A dagger that can pierce through enemies and also deal true damage simultaneously makes this the only weapon in existence that can do that. The catch is that it has lower range and lower damage. The damage I can forgive since you're only losing an average of about 25 per shot versus a foul, and because I consider tier 13 weapons to be on par with white bag drops, they don't really count. It's just the reduced range that bothers me. There's two problems with a multi-targeting dagger. 1. The dagger classes are mostly rushing classes, so they don't really care about taking out mooks so much as just getting to the boss. 2. Dagger classes are squishy. There's very little incentive to be using a short-range dagger with greatly reduced DPS, even if it could hit multiple targets. That's like practically saying there's a rock that can kill 3 birds with 1 stone instead of 2, but it has a tenth of the range. That kind of defeats the purpose of being able to kill 3 birds with 1 stone, because if you can't get close enough, it doesn't matter if that 1 stone could kill millions of birds. It's just not effective. I can understand the damage reduction on Stinger because you're gaining multi-targeting and true damage, which above certain defense levels can exceed foul, but why the range reduction? The one reason why Ray Katana isn't completely unusable is because it has higher range, which means you don't have to face tank a god wall to get your shots in. Queen Stinger should stay at 5.6 range, just like the other standard daggers. Heck, I could probably buff it up to 6 and it would still not be overpowered. You'll almost always be using a tier 12 or 13 for DPS, but Queen Stinger can help you with clearing. Besides, this is a white bag drop from an insanely hard dungeon. I'd argue that it could even be allowed to be a direct upgrade from a T12 because we're talking endgame drops here. This one might spark a bit of controversy, and yes, I'm aware of the buff Sea Dirk mean, but hear me out on this one. The Dirk of Cronus or Sea Dirk fits alongside Helm of the Juggernaut and Shield of Ogmer as some of the rarest whites in the entire game, bar none. It's essentially meant to be a higher DPS dagger with a shorter range to compensate. On average, it only comes out to be a roughly 170 damage per shot. Take Aetheryte Dagger, Sinister Deeds, the tier 13, and Symbiotic Ripper. All of these are 10 if not 20 times easier to get, and they all come relatively close to the Sea Dirk's power. In fact, the Ripper just straight up beats the Sea Dirk without any drawbacks whatsoever. Okay, you lose 2 vitality, who cares, we have bets. The Aetheryte Dagger, even after its nerfs, still trumps Sea Dirk, just with much shorter range, but considering that the latter also has reduced range, you might as well just have the extra damage. They buffed Sea Dirk, yes, that's true, I saw the patch about it a while ago. It's no longer just a completely inferior version of the Aetheryte, but the buffs are not significant enough to warrant its rarity. We consider Jug, Oreo, Ogmer, Pogmer, a Spirit Trap, Tablet, Conflict. These are all really solid whites that serve a unique purpose that the tiered abilities just cannot fulfill. But like the previous weapons mentioned in this list, Sea Dirk just does not stand out. It doesn't give enough of a damage boost to offset its lower rate of fire and reduced range. It's one of the rarest whites to ever exist, and there's a plethora of other weapons that straight up beat it out and are worlds easier to get. The range reduction's fine. I think there should be some drawback to increasing the base damage of a Sea Dirk, but it should possess a significant enough damage boost to make you want to use it. Just like the Pirate King's Cutlass, which reduces its range in exchange for having it be an incredibly powerful DPS sword, the Sea Dirk should do the same. We're reducing its range already, but increasing its average damage from 190 to perhaps 220 or even 230 makes it a very significant dagger to get. I'd argue that it deserves to be the best dagger in the game since it's the rarest. It's not as dangerous to obtain as the Queen Stinger, but it should serve a bigger purpose than just being a pretty looking dagger. Last one on the list is the Staff of Esben. I'm not going to sugarcoat it, it sucks. Reduced range and rate of fire with no bonus damage to compensate for it, along with a curving shot pattern. The bonus, it can hit multiple targets per shot. Now, considering the fact that Necromancers, Wizards, and Mystics are already insanely good at crowd control, there is very little reason to use this staff. Sure, you could argue that it's good for things like Shatters, but that's kind of an edge case where the alternative of using a regular staff isn't necessarily a worse choice. In all circumstances, the Staff of Unholy Sacrifice from the Cultist hideout beats Esben's staff uncontested. Mind you, it very well should, since cults are harder to do, but you're starting to see a noticeable pattern here, right? All of the whites on this list are mediocre at best and unremarkable. There's nothing that incentivizes you to want to use the Esben staff over a plain Cosmic. You lose too much from this staff in terms of DPS and range just so you can hit multiple targets, something that staff classes don't really struggle with in the first place. Plus, the funky amplitude of the staff is counterproductive to trying to shoot enemies since you want to attack in front of you and not necessarily around you. The two ways I could see this staff being buffed, first is the Queen Stinger scenario again. You greatly boost the range. I'm not saying to make it St. Abraham wand level of range, but reducing the range of a weapon meant to be used to clear large waves of enemies, that kind of defeats the purpose of it. Boosting it to 9.0 range would put it alongside the Staff of the Crystal Serpent and Tezcatlipoca's Tail. 9 range it's admittedly a lot, but since you pay such a high price for the wave clear, there needs to be something worth that sacrifice. The other case is just to buff the damage. Usually an attack range or rate of fire reduction is compensated by giving more base damage. Case in point, the Doombow or the Aetheryte. Esben has the same average damage per shot as a Cosmic Hole, but you lose 20% rate of fire, so you actually go from 80 per shot to an average of 64. That's worse than a tier 11 staff with even shorter range. It needs more damage. You can bring its average damage per shot to over 100 and people will still probably prefer to use Cosmic for DPS. However, it will open up players to consider using Esben as a swap out, similar to how people swap out Doombow and Quarrelbow, one for mobbing and the other for bossing. So that wraps up the 5 white bag weapons that I think need buffs the most. Of course, there are some other UT weapons that could use some touching up that I can cover, but I kind of wanted to keep it 5 for now. Maybe I'll do a 2.0 or something in the near future. Let me know though what you guys think about my choices, if you agree or disagree with them, or if you think there are other weapons that need some more love. I'm not necessarily saying Deca has to buff these items, they're all still viable in some way, shape, or form, but they're just not that significant to be worth using over standard tiered items for the most part. Mind you, white bags shouldn't always be linearly superior to tiered items, they're meant to just be alternatives. For example, we have like Augmer. Augmer instead of stun and armor breaks. It's great, but not always what you want to use at that current point in time. But they should at least be equal or a little bit better since tiered items are so easy to get, and white bags are... they're really rare, a lot of them anyway. So when you have a super rare drop that's marginally worse than the standard, why would you ever want to go out of your way to get them? They need to stand out. For the simple reason that they are rare items, you need a reason to want to get them. Otherwise, people aren't going to be making an active attempt to search for these weapons. Anyway, that's going to be it. If you guys enjoyed, a rating would be much appreciated, and if you want to see more content like this, please subscribe to the channel, and hopefully I'll continue to add some more content for you to watch. But thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you again soon in the next video. Take care.